Okay, so let me just start by saying a few housekeeping words. So this webinar is going to run until 5 p.m. and will be recorded. Please pop any questions in the Q&A and these will be answered at the end or in the chat. And just to introduce your presenters for today, it's myself, Giuliana. I work at the Natural History Museum and I'm a community science officer on the Nature Park project. And Jane Buchanan, who's a teacher and geography lead at Storth Primary School, who'll tell you a bit more about habitat mapping in real life. So the goals for today's session are to learn a bit more about the purpose, educational and scientific value of habitat mapping, to have a look and a demo at using the Habitat Mapper tool and how you work that to draw your habitat maps online, and then have a think about how you might be able to run a habitat mapping session in your own setting and hear from a school who have done it and answer some common questions. So first of all, the Nature Park map. I'm just going to show you a quick run through of the Nature Park map. This is the main place where you get to see all the different types of data collected by young people all in one place. So it's about different types of data that all can be layered together in a single map. So let me quickly show you. Can you see the screen okay? Hang on. I've shared the wrong thing. One moment, I need to share the screen. Okay, here we are. That should be sharing now. So from the main web page, the main homepage of the Nature Park, you can access the map either from the Resources tab by going on Nature Park Data, or by simply scrolling down, and here we've got the map here. So by opening it up, I just want to point out there is a technical guide here with really lovely and short and snappy videos that kind of walk you through all the different features of the map. But just very quickly to show you what it looks like. These are all the Nature Park schools in green. And as you zoom a bit further in, you get to see all the different habitats that sort of pop up. You can add layers. And here you see sort of the site boundaries, and those baseline habitats is what we're going to be talking about today, are already on there. And then you can add all sorts of other data that gets laid on at the same time. You can add sort of iNaturalist wildlife observations, nature connection data, environmental data, even geology as well. And just to show you an example of what this looks like in practice, this is a school I've already zoomed into, and you can see some of the layers that I've added under map layers here. This is where you add the layers and you can select which ones. And then map layers is more like a legend where you get to see all that you've got on, and you can sort of toggle them on and off and be able to see how all the data kind of looks like all together in one place, and be able to zoom in a corner of your site and be able to get a bit more of an understanding of the biodiversity there, of its value for biodiversity, and where you'd be able to make those improvements. So this is just to show you the data that you collect through habitat mapping and all the other Nature Park activities on here. This is where they'd all end up, and this is where you can see them all together in one place. If you like the look of some of this data, maybe you've looked at a school local to you and you can see that they've got some really interesting dots on their map that you haven't, that you'd like to collect. All you need to go is to these info symbols here. And it tells you in the layers description, tells you what that data is. And then if you click that hyperlink here, it takes you directly to the web page, enables you to collect that data, which as soon as it's inputted in, it appears on this lovely Nature Park map. Okay. So what is habitat mapping with the Nature Park? So it's a method to map and record the habitats right across your site, from the largest kind of playgrounds and playing fields perhaps, to the smallest nooks and crannies. You might have bird boxes or bird hotels, even water butts, and be able to kind of really get an in-depth view of your outdoor space. There's a teacher who was quoted as saying, it's like putting magnifying glasses on their students. There's so many stories of young people walking past the same bit of their school every day and doing habitat mapping. They notice something that they'd never noticed before about their site. So it's really about getting an in-depth view of your space and turning your students into scientists. This is about doing real scientific research and using and creating real world data sets that then allow you to take evidence-based decisions about the sort of improvements you want to make for your space. It's the essential first step in the nature park journey. And if you consider your outdoor space as being your lab, this is like prepping your lab before you head out and do all the wonderful experiments and using all the lovely curriculum linked activities we've got in the project. I'm happy to say over 1,548 was the latest number of schools and settings have mapped part of their site already. So you're joining a huge cohort of people right across the country that are mapping their sites and getting out there and understanding their place a bit better. You're probably already familiar with the 5-step cycle. This is how we envisage schools kind of starting their nature park journey and going through the cycle. And the habitat mapping fits in that very first step of starting to get to know your space. The value of habitat mapping, we've sort of touched on this, but it's to help you and your young people to understand your site's resources before making any interventions for biodiversity. It's about gathering that sort of baseline data before you make changes, so that you're really sure that you're not putting a pond in a really sunny, high quality meadow, for example, but that you're finding the right sort of place potentially for that pond. So for example, ponds quite like having sort of in semi-shade, like dappled shade, perhaps near a hedgerow or in a sort of scrubby habitat, and getting that kind of baseline understanding of what's there really ensures that the changes that you're making have the greatest impact. For young people, it's an opportunity to develop essential green skills, and particularly GIS mapping skills. GIS is Geographic Information System, and it's a system that creates, manages, analyzes, and maps all kinds of data. So it's really a foundation for mapping and analysis, and it's used in virtually most careers, from all the way from obviously science, but also the police force uses them, from forestry to finance, logistics, marketing. There are so many different ways that data can be put on a map and used in a variety of different careers. A really useful tool for new careers. And finally, to contribute really valuable data on an area that we know primary and secondary school make up a piece of land that's twice the size of Birmingham, absolutely massive. And it's a bit of a mystery as to what's there and how biodiversity might be able to improve there. By doing habitat mapping, we can indirectly estimate biodiversity across all school sites, across nationally as a whole. And if you pair that habitat mapping and that estimation of biodiversity with measuring biodiversity on the ground, we've got some of the nature surveys includes things such as the pollinator count. By doing both, you start to get a really good understanding and a really robust understanding of the nature and the biodiversity on your site to then be able to make those evidence-based decisions. And a final thing is having all this information then allows us to predict what sort of gains can be made. So in an area that doesn't have flowers, if you add patches of wildflowers, for example, what can we expect that to do? And how can we expect pollinators or other biodiversity to improve as a result of that change? Also, school habitat maps are really fine in detail. and in this case, better than satellite images. You can see on the left is a satellite image that says that there's freshwater and arable land, and when that same school area was mapped by young people at this school in Co-op Academy in Manchester, they got a much finer scale detail on the actual habitat categories and the actual habitats present on their site. So this is real cutting edge data and science that we're doing. Just a note that what I'm going to show you today is the Habitat Mapper tool, and this is about collecting the baseline data at the very start. If there's anything that involves the word change, whether it's a car park that's been created, recently added, or whether you've added some wildflowers and you've changed part of your playing field to let it go fallow, for example, those sorts of changes would all go on a different tool that's called a tracking changes tool. The idea being that we're going to compare the habitat map, the data on the habitat map tool and the data on the tracking changes tool, and then be able to demonstrate how that biodiversity is improving across a national scale. So this is an example of a habitat map that a school has made. And we have 8 habitat categories to choose from. And these have all been adapted from real world data sets that are the UK Habitats Directive and the Urban Greening Factor. So the data being collected by young people is comparable and transferable alongside with data outside of nature parks. So this is real world data sets that we are collecting. And for each of these habitat categories, these sort of broad umbrella categories, we have activities that sort of introduce that particular habitat. So for example, with trees, we introduce the concept of broadleafed and evergreen. And crucially, each of those broad habitats have these flowcharts. And these walk the young people through the steps of identifying, well, yes, it's trees, but how are those trees laid out? And what kind of, if it's an area, what kind of woodland do we have? And those blue boxes at the end are absolutely crucial. And those are what the end habitat category will be when we go and draw it on the map, which I'll show you in just a moment. So before using the tool, make sure you're registered with the Nature Park website. You already have completed your site boundary. So this is your sort of green perimeter around your school site. It takes less than 2 minutes in most cases to draw. And have a go at some of our scaffolding activities. So these include some nature connection activities, some others that introduce habitats and what those mean for the wildlife that live in them. And there's lots of resources for different age groups that you can filter for and choose from in the resource library. I'm just going to spotlight this one resource that introduces the concept of a habitat for key stages 1 and 2. And we have another one for key stages 3 and 4 for the older age groups as well. So these might be quite helpful to kind of plan into a lesson before you then head out and do habitat mapping outside. How to access the tool, make sure you're logged into the Nature Park, into your Nature Park account. The Nature Park map that I showed you earlier, that's open access and available to anyone in the world. Whereas to draw actual habitats on your school site, you need a Nature Park account. It's behind a login barrier. So make sure you're signed in. You make your way to the Mapping Your Site page, and you click the launch activity link, which I can just highlight here on the right-hand side here, the bottom right. Make sure that when you're launching that, anytime you see you're using a Nature Park digital tool and there is a blue button that appears, make sure you click that blue button, this one here. It just saves you time entering your details, and it's just really quick. It's a single sign-on. As soon as you see that blue button, make sure you always click that. Okay, let's head over to habitat mapping. So let's go here. So This is the habitat mapping page. You can find it under Get Started, on your dashboard, on your resources from the resource library, or simply just type in habitat mapping in the search bar here. And this is what the page looks like. Let me just point out this blog here. If you'd like to know a bit more about how the nature park habitat maps are contributing to real world biodiversity, global biodiversity research, there's a blog there with information about how that all fits in and how it's real scientific research. There's a great video, and here's the launch activity button to start the activity there. And I really recommend just grabbing a cup of tea and spending a few minutes reading through this before you get started. There are really helpful guides here. There's a troubleshooting guide, really short and sweet, and a digital tools how-to guide. Let me show you what that looks like here. So I'd love to keep you here to go through every element of habitat mapping, but I want to spare you the time. So I really recommend going on this guide because it's got amazing little videos like this, like 48 seconds or 22 seconds, really nice, short, snappy videos that walk you through each of the features of habitat mapping. And here are the 8 habitat categories. And by clicking on each of these, you'll find the essential flowchart for each of those habitat categories. Okay, so you've launched Habitat Mapper tool. This is what it looks like. So first of all, I'm going to highlight this base map gallery on the right-hand side. By the way, if you'd like to open this alongside with me, just go, there's probably a link in the chat onto the habitat mapping page, and then click launch activity here. I'll just give you a minute if you want to get started and open that up. Make sure you're logged in. So just briefly to highlight, you can change the different base maps if you'd like a different background before you start drawing on your map. And most of the work on this habitat mapper tool you'll be doing from this edit button on the right-hand side. Before I click that though, I'm based at the Natural History Museum, so I'm just going to go there now and make that my school site, my example school site. Here we are. So you can see this green line around the perimeter. That's the site boundary. So that's something you'll have already done before you start habitat mapping. So let's zoom into the area that I know I'm going to be mapping today. And then we click edit. Before you do anything, a little top tip. Go to settings under here and enable the snapping, which it already is. Go to snapping layers and tick this on. This is called the snapping tool. And what it allows you to do is when you've got two shapes that are really close together, it snaps them together. So it matches them up really nicely. So it essentially makes sure that your maps are as absolutely neat and stunning as they can be. So I'm just going to show you that again. So under snapping, hang on one second. So under edit, settings, snapping layers, and then tick that on. This will become a bit more apparent as soon as I start mapping. Just give me a second. Okay. So we are now ready to start mapping. We have, on the right-hand side, we have all the different types of habitats. We have the microhabitat points, we have the lines, and we have the areas at the bottom. I really recommend imagining this as icing layers on a cake. So you would start from the areas, then the lines, and then the points. So if you were to ice a cake, you'd be starting with the biggest sort of areas, the biggest chunks first, then you'd be doing the ribbons, and then you'd be doing the spots at the very end. This is so you start with the largest areas first, and it sort of ensures that it makes it an easier process step by step. So I'm going to pretend that we've been outside, we've just come back, and we've mapped our playing field. So we've used the flowcharts, we've come back, we know that this area is a playing field, and that is under our grass and wildflowers habitat. So I click area, and then I start drawing. So this is a click, single click, and then a move, single click, move, single click, move. And then you sort of go along like that until you are happy. And you can sort of use as many or as few points as you like. I like to use as few as possible that still ensures it's an accurate shape. And then you can always update this later on. To finish, you double click. So it's a single click and move. And then once you've finished your shape, it's a double click to finish. And it gets highlighted like this. It will ask me what kind of grass and wildflower habitat that is, and I know that we've been outside, we've used the flowchart, and it's a playing field. Your URN will be automatically filled in. This is just a dummy URN. Click Create. And this is now a live addition to the map. So if you were to go on the Nature Park map now, you'd be able to see this live. Now, to go back, because we want to add a few more shapes, I click this little arrow on the right, apologies for this, click this little arrow on the left here, and then I want to add a line of trees. Now note that you can add an area of trees or you can add a line of trees. So make sure that using the flowchart will give you the answer as to whether it's a line or an area, and make sure you're using the right one. So if it's a line, it really is a line. You're not drawing a line around an area. In this case, I know that we've got a line of trees. So again, it's sort of when you know you're about to draw, when your mouse sort of turns into this little cross with this orange dot that follows it around, that's when you're ready to start drawing. So again, you dot and you move along, dot, move along, ready to finish, double click. And that is trees in a line, create. I go back again because I want to add a dot, which is a log pile. So this is our microhabitat. I click on that. I know it's somewhere under that tree there. Select, and now automatically then you then just click create. Okay. So if we now want to adjust or delete any of these shapes, go back, scroll back up to the very top of this list of habitats. And in the middle here, you've got a sort of cursor symbol with a little location mark. It's called Select by Point. We really suggest you use this one. It's the kind of neatest and easiest one to use. So click on Select by Point, and then you can select any of the shapes to sort of adjust them. So my log pile, I can go here, and then I can either just move it and then update, or I can delete it. There's no undo button, so once you click delete, it is deleted. And say we want to change slightly the shape of this playing field, make sure that you are on Select by Point, click on the playing field, and now notice that this sort of orange box appears around your shape. If you click again, you get little dots. If you click again, you get the box. Click again, little dots. Box, little dots. Box, little dots. So this allows you to kind of, the box, you move the entire thing. Or the little dots, this is where you can get kind of really neat with things and sort of move either the orange or the white dots around to make the shape a bit more accurate to what you wanted it to be. There we are. And then you click update. Okay, let's show where the snapping tool really comes into its own. So we make sure it's turned on, this settings, snapping layers, and it's ticked. It is. So say we want to add a, let me go a bit closer, a raised bed. And I know that we have a raised bed in this area. So I've clicked on it and I'm ready to draw. I click and then I move. As I get close to the shape I've already drawn, this sort of orange line and dot appears. That makes sure that the shape I'm now drawing snaps to the old one, so that they're really close and neat together. And there we go. And say we've got the raised bed that kind of goes up to here. Select the raised bed and create. And now I make sure that those two shapes are nice and neat and snapping together. This is particularly useful because we don't want to overlap different types of areas together. This affects the biodiversity modeling because then it won't be able to tell, well, that 1 meter square, is it a raised bed or is it a playing field? And it affects that estimate of the biodiversity. So really useful to use that snapping tool to get them really neat together. And just to say, we really encourage and we really want learners to be at the heart of this process and going outside, using the flowcharts and deciding what sort of habitat categories each of those are. A quick run through of some examples of not so great maps. So this one, for example, the playing field and lawn or lawn area, perfect. Lovely area, it's all covered in yellow, perfect. And then there are some areas here on the top left there, that's a car park, where the habitat category is right, it's a non-natural impermeable surface, but it's been drawn as a line around that area instead of a whole area. That also affects the biodiversity modeling because only the area under that line would be counted and not the area inside that line. So make sure that if it's an area, you pick the area and draw it as an area, and if it's a line, it's drawn as a line. This is a bit of an erratic map with a few things going on, but I just want to point out on this, in this corner here, this area here, there's lots of different shapes all overlapping together, which is kind of what I mentioned before, these overlapping polygons. The modeling then won't be able to tell, was it a woodland or was it a playing field or a hedge or a bush? So make sure you're using that snapping tool to get them close together. And just another note here, there's lots of kind of trees that have been drawn on as single individual trees. If you use the flowchart, it would guide you towards I'm very sure that this probably would have been a line of trees. If it's longer than 20 meters, it's a line of trees. So you don't need to go in and dot each individual tree. It's just a very simple line across. So it also saves you a lot of time. And this one, as well as having the lines instead of areas, just to note, this one doesn't have the site boundary to begin with. So make sure you do that before you start habitat mapping. And if you've drawn lots of shapes already and you don't have a site boundary, that's okay. It can be done retrospectively. Just you'll need to go through each individual shape and update it once you've got the site boundary so that it makes sure it's linked to that URN and it means all that data is linked to your school. So how does this work in practice in your setting? So really recommend having a look at the habitat checklist. This is on the main habitat mapping page. And it walks you through kind of what sort of habitats you have, what's the best kind of age group that might be able to match and map that habitat, and the order that you might be able to do it in. And it's really useful to kind of be able to gauge which different age groups, which classes might be doing which habitats, involving your colleagues and involving SLT as well. So it's a really great way to kind of strategize how you might run habitat mapping in your setting. And a few ideas on how to run a habitat mapping session in practice. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. A few examples are that you might be able to divide your class into different habitats, or if you have one large habitat, you can just focus on that and have different subgroups of the class decide if they all agree on the type of habitat or not. You can get younger learners to map the habitat and older age groups to also map the habitat. Do they agree? You might also have a very active eco club that's really into the habitat mapping side of things, who then come and do a school-wide assembly, for example. So we really want to encourage a whole school approach with this, so that as many of you as possible are involved and taking ownership of your school site and really on board with making the changes to improve it for biodiversity. If you have tablets and Wi-Fi signal in your outdoor space, then you can use Habitat Mapper tool outside on a tablet, for example. But don't worry, if not, you can print off maps of your site, have them on a piece of paper, and have the young people kind of write and draw the shapes on the paper map, label it, and then be able to come back to the classroom together and upload those on the online tool. And a great chance to actually have a discussion at that stage. We've been into many schools which brought up the conversation of, oh, it's a bit grayer than we'd have liked, all our outdoor space. And there were some really fascinating discussions about flooding, for example, and how they might be able to improve their site from that point of view. A reminder to use the activities and the flowcharts to identify the habitats. And now I'd like to pass on to Jane to talk to you a bit more about the habitat mapping at Storth Primary School.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me, Giuliana? Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Brilliant. So hello, everybody. My name's Jane. I work at Storth Primary School. We're a small village primary school in Cumbria, and we have quite an extensive school grounds. We recently mapped our site probably in October. So I'm just quite fascinated by the snapping layers bit, because I need to go back and do that to my map. Thank you, Giuliana. Yes, so if we can go to the next slide. So we did our outline of our school on the digital map, and then I was actually teaching the Amazon rainforest at the moment to my year 5 and 6 class, and we were talking about how we could make a difference to biodiversity, and we obviously can't go to the Amazon and do anything in the Amazon rainforest. So I linked our habitat mapping of our school grounds to actually doing something local when we were thinking about something global. So we were using it in that context. So for me, what we did was I used snipping tool on Microsoft to just make a map that we could then photocopy a copy of, and I put tracing paper over the top. So I blew them up to A3 size, and we had tracing paper because we talked about layers, so they can see the layers on the digital map, but actually getting them to understand how layers work on a map was an important thing for them. Then we went outside, and with generally low-tech pencils and coloured pencils, they went round in pairs and found different parts of our site. So I put groups of 6 in different areas, and they had to map that area, and then they moved along during the afternoon to map each area on their map. As you can see from the bottom of the picture, we're not a very urban area, we're a nice little village school. We do have a large playground and a large playing field, but then we're surrounded by trees and hedges. We have a wildlife area and a forest schools area as well in our school. So it was quite interesting for them to go and do the main areas. So we did the main, the areas of trees, the areas of grass, the areas of tarmac and playground, footpaths, our wildlife area. So our next thing is when we get to the spring, we want to go and do the same thing again, because we realise that we've not done the little micro habitats, the bird boxes and the bat boxes, which we do have, and the hedgehog house that we do have in school, that they want to put on next. But Christmas took over in a primary school, and we didn't get to carry on. Can we have the next slide? So the next slide is, you can now see, this is one of the maps, rather a dodgy photo of one of the maps that the children produced. So you can see the tracing paper over the top of the A3 coloured paper. And they coloured in using the colours that we would use then on the digital map. So you can see that it tallies up quite nicely with what we then produced on the habitat mapper. So I put the big areas on in my after school time, and then we looked at it and they compared what I'd done. So they marked my work basically in class afterwards. So they compared what they had on their maps and whether I'd forgotten anything. And I did get criticism, so I'm quite glad that I can use this snapping layer thing now, because next time I show them it, they'll be like going, oh, I've now learned how to make them all join together, because they were a little bit critical about that. Actually, I had gaps. So it transferred really nicely, and it didn't take me very long. And they were quite pleased. And then together as a class, we put little bits on that they hadn't put on. And since then, we've been out and we've done the tree survey like you showed in the thing before. We've also done a water permeability survey. And over the Christmas holidays, I went in and I've put up little markers. So we're going to start doing environmental monitoring. And every month, there's now a period in our calendar where different classes will go and measure the temperatures and the soil temperature, the air temperature in those different parts in our school grounds, so we can start to make decisions about what we want to improve. I think that's about all, unless anybody had anything else they wanted to ask later on.
That's amazing. Thank you, Jane. I love that you got marked for your map. That's a really nice way to...
Yeah, I have some quite critical mappers in my class.
That's fantastic to hear. That's such a great example of an inspiring way to do habitat mapping. I'd never heard of that way, but what a great idea to use tracing paper like that. That's wonderful, Jane. Thank you for sharing.
That's okay, thank you.
Just to answer a couple of frequently asked questions, you do require internet connection to use the tool. So yeah, just make sure that if you do have it outside, you can use a tablet. Otherwise, just use paper and then come back and access it with a web browser. But you can use laptops, desktops, tablets, phones, anything that can access a web browser would be able to access the habitat mapper. And on tablets, just make sure you kind of tap your finger across a polygon instead of, you don't need to drag it. If you just tap it, it will form the shape as you go. And if you're struggling to do it at all, there's a digital tools how-to guide that I've already sort of shown you a sneak peek about. There's our wonderful case studies with lots of inspiring ideas of different ways you can run habitat mapping in your setting. You've been lucky today that you have Jane, but there's lots of different stories you can read through from the case studies webpage. And you can, of course, get in touch through the national mailbox, the hello@ email address. And we also have a team of regional officers all across England who know their local area extremely well, are fantastic at habitat mapping, and most importantly, are really great and really helpful people. So please find their email address here on the screen or on the Find Local Help page on the website. And a very nice person will be responding. And just to say what happens to the data. So it's all stored on ArcGIS online. As soon as you draw it on the Habitat Mapper tool, it will appear on that nature park map. We really encourage you to use this data that you've collected to look at your map in detail and use it to take evidence-based decisions about what sort of improvements you can make, where you can make them, and then making sure that you're evidencing as you go along, you're sort of tracking those changes as you go. The data will be used for nature park research purposes, the biggest one of which is to demonstrate that biodiversity gain across nature park schools as a whole. So imagining all of the schools together to make up one massive nature park. And just to say, rest assured that this is all real scientific data. Nature Park is an educational project, but it's also a mass community science project. So this is doing real citizen science, where young people are collaborating with research to do with researchers to conduct real scientific studies and groundbreaking in our case, and really drive nature recovery. In terms of next steps, that's number one, that's your baseline habitat map. You can use the Nature Park map to view all those different data sets in one place to help you identify the right opportunities for your site. We also have evidence-based guidance, and we collate this looking at tons of academic research and best practice guidance, so that if you want to create, say, a little wildflower strip in a corner of your playing field, you can rest assured that you're relying on the best kind of advice out there. And same with ponds, so sort of restoring ponds and creating new ponds. And the tracking changes tool. So when you've made those changes, make sure you're popping them on the tracking changes tool to be able to watch and demonstrate your biodiversity improve. Thank you very much. I am just going to quickly show you on this page here how to access all the wonderful resources we've just talked about. So on the main page, under resources, if you go to browse resources here, you can filter by key stage, subject, theme, and also if you go to all resources, you can sort of do the same here, sort of length of activity type and Nature Park step as well. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Giuliana. We have got a question in the chat from Christopher. I'll just read it out. So he's asking, we've got 2 schools sharing a single campus, and they were thinking of getting each school to do the appropriate portion of the site. Is that the right approach? There are common areas, including car parks, so we would split these 2. And then the second part of the question is, should the building be included in the site boundary? But the first part is 2 schools sharing a single campus, and what's the best approach there?
2 schools sharing the same campus. So would you have, yeah, you would have different URNs, wouldn't you? So you would have the same campus. I think as long as you have a single, so if it's a single, that's a good question. I think I would do a single sort of perimeter, single boundary, and then yes, have each school kind of contribute and map different areas of the site. That sounds good. I would say for buildings, definitely don't map those. So it's only about outdoor space. I am going to, that's my sort of, I'm kind of 90% sure that's the correct answer, but just in case, could you pop a quick email to the hello@ address so I can just double check that and say, absolutely, that's the right thing to do. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Giuliana. But the building would be included in the site boundary, is that right? Just not just not mapped as a habitat.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. So when you do that green kind of perimeter around your entire boundary, your building would be part of that. But then when you do the habitat mapping of identifying the different habitats, then you would only do the outdoor space within that boundary, if that makes sense. Thank you, Laura.
Perfect. Thanks, Giuliana. And that's great, actually, because Elaine has also asked the same question about mapping the building. So that's helpful. That's all the questions we've had in the chat. So I think we can finish up there. So big thank you to Giuliana and Jane for speaking with us all today.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Happy habitat mapping.